I hope it's working. Well, as I said, the focus of today's presentation is going to be about process and materiality, which are those two issues that have been guiding somehow our work since the beginning of our professional career. As the moderator said, I mean, we are not a huge practice, but we are an international practice somehow. We always thought that our common ground was not just Spain or not just Europe. I mean, we always thought that as architects, we could contribute all around the world. And this took us to think always that the idea of being an architect abroad means to understand your processes as architect, and the idea of how to use the specificity of every site where we work, related in this case with materiality, in the best possible way, and understand it since the very beginning of the process of the work. So what I'm going to show you are 4 buildings that we have developed during the last 10 years, which are, I think, good samples to explain somehow this idea of process and this idea of materiality that we try to get in all our projects. The first one, and probably the most renowned from our career, is the Stettin Philharmonic Hall. The Stettin Philharmonic was a building which is placed in the west occidental part of Poland, very close to Germany, just 150 kilometers away from Germany. And it was a prominent city before the Second World War. The site where we had to build the new Philharmony was the former site that was occupied by this building that you can see on the screen, the former Philharmony. And this was very important in terms of process, because it was already an important site before us, before the new interventions somehow. And I think it's always to have it in mind, because as architects, we consider that we are not the ending of a site or the ending of a place. We are just another layer. And this is something that we always have in mind in our way of working. A layer that is going to be added to this kind of landscape. This is a Stettin. You can see here a mix of different influences. I mean, you can see neo-Gothic somehow elements like the cathedral, this kind of, let's call it romantic approach, the castle of the city, the commerce period that you can read here in this housing complex. So somehow this atmosphere or this ensemble of layers is Stettin. And the context, which is very, very important always in our way of working, it was composed through this kind of buildings. I mean, this is, in fact, this is our neighbor. I mean, the building that is just right to our place, and the building that we should have deal with. This means that when you start working and when you approach to a place without knowing anything about that place, without having an holistic understanding of what's going on there, we start working always with the physical facts. I mean, we start working with this, for example, how to relate with the neighbor, how to relate with the verticality of the elements, this idea of mass and gravity, then this kind of West Pomeranian architecture, it's always transmitting. And when you start working with the physical fact, I mean, which was what I said, I mean, the context, and you start to relate with it, and you start to play with it, there is always a moment in our process where these things happen. I mean, where you start to propose somehow what is in your background, what is in your I mean, the collection of desires, ideas, and obsessions that you have. Somehow, this is what the sketch shows. I mean, is the mix of how to deal following your process between reality and between abstraction, which is what we try to get, or what we try to transmit when we propose something. And somehow this was the result. Of course, when you are designing a philharmony, it's very easy to have starting points. You know, how to compose an ensemble of things. I mean, playing with the same ideas I was explaining at the beginning, this idea of verticality and mass and gravity, how to compose something by the repetition of an element. I mean, it's something that was rooted in this idea of composition or music or whatever, how to start playing with the elements, trying to get some kind of expressiveness, an expressiveness that at the beginning we didn't know how would be somehow. Um, it, when you play with the physical context, when you approach to a site, when you start working with the physical facts of the site, you know, we never know how it's going to be the outcome of the process. That's what makes the architect's work so interesting, because you never know exactly what's going to be the outcome of your work. And our task, our commitment during the process is try to get an outcome that could be somehow the reflect of the site where we work, but intensifying their qualities, intensifying the strength of the sites where we work. In this case, this is the outcome somehow, this kind of shape, which somehow synthesizes for us the essential elements that we discovered on the site. Of course, it has this characteristic expression because it's something that is part of our way of understanding architecture. But it's important to know it tries to transmit this importance because this site already was important before us. This site was the site where was placed the former philharmony. So we didn't want to propose something that somehow could break or could demolish somehow the past of the site. We want to recover the past of this site. So that's why the building plays in this expressive way. That's why the building tries to relate with the neighbor, but without following the same language. I mean, we weren't interested about following the same language or following the same materiality. We wanted to break apart from the physical fact, understanding it, but we wanted to establish a clear line between contemporary and the pre-existence. But at the same time, follow somehow the same rules or the same codes. But what means to be specific on a site, and what can you offer when you, like in our case, when you are from abroad and you have to work in a place that you, as I said, really don't know and really don't understand. Of course, the physical fact helps you, but the main task is try to get which is the right attitude of the building, which is the right character of the space, or if you let me use the expression, the right atmosphere. This is, I think, the most important in our, let's say, process. We try to understand which is the right attitude of the building that we are proposing always. A building, well, it's a typical metaphor that the architects used to use. The idea of the conversation with the place and this idea of that your commitment is to establish a relationship that tries to establish a good conversation with the place. In our case, what we try is to discover, we're not interested about somehow the conversation itself. We are interested about the tone that you use in that conversation with the place. I mean, trying to be synthetic. I mean, the most important for us is to discover when you need to scream up, when you need to be shy with the building, when you need to be more calm, or when the building, as in this case, needs to express as almost screaming that it's an important building into an important place. that was the former place of the former Philharmony. The building outside concentrates all its expressivity with all the movements into the facade, with all the play at the rooftop, with the line of the skyline. But inside, somehow, the building tries to explore a very important concept for us. Let's call it a word, a very important word for us that somehow guides all our work. Since the very beginning in our professional career, we have been developing public buildings. And this idea of public, it's rooted in the way we work. Public means for us to understand the word beyond its functional term. I mean, public is a place where people needs to feel that somehow belongs to it. It's in a space, or should be in a space, that needs to provoke public life and public activity. And this is what we try to get, what we intentionally were exploring into the interior of the building. I mean, the building, basically, it's a covered square that organizes all the movements through the building. The building is composed by a sequence of public staircases that allows you to move freely, independently of the shows that the building is hosting, and that somehow organizes with what I said before, this idea of public activity, provoking it too. The building tries to explore this through a very simple materiality, not because we were looking for a kind of minimalism, or not because we were obsessed with this idea of white or textures. The building is the background. The building is the background for the people who moves through, for the people who attends the place, to the people that basically is gonna full of life the building itself. But there is an element that was really the heart of the building, which is somehow the main concert hall. Here you can see the section. In the section is a classical typology, 2:1 proportion, that somehow synthesizes our interpretation in a contemporary way of what's a concert hall devoted to live music in our century somehow. And it's a good sample to come back to the issue of materiality. I mean, as you can see here, the entire hall, it's finished with gold leaves. Well, in this case, are fake gold leaves, but well, the idea of using this material can be somehow understand. Perhaps for somebody who doesn't know stitching, or for somebody who doesn't understand the context, perhaps can look as a free gesture somehow of this decision of using the gold leaves. But in fact, it's rooted with the nature of the place. I mean, there is a huge tradition in stitching and in Poland about using gold leaf, and because of his huge tradition with religion, basically, which helps somehow the locals, and which helps somehow then. Even nowadays, there is a craftsmanship tradition about using this material. That's why we decided to use a local tradition somehow, a local knowledge, and we try to incorporate it in our process, because that means to be specific too. And that's important to note it. I mean, to be specific is not just to relate with your neighbors or with the buildings that are surrounding you. It's related with the fact of understanding the techniques, or technologies, or somehow the industrial context that is surrounding you. Because, I mean, the ending of your process is to build, and that's something real. I mean, that's something that is a fact. So we try to understand that when we design a building. We try to understand the concept going beyond somehow the physical facts that are surrounding the plot. Well, as you can see here, I mean, the main console hall is characterized by these triangular shapes somehow, which is, it's a synthesis of course, of our obsessions, or it's something that, of course, we wanted to develop in this way, but it has the value that every angle, every element, every single decision made into this space is done because of the acoustics of the space. And I want to remark it because when you design something, when you propose something, when you try to get something designing, you need to have an argument that needs to go beyond your own desire or your own perception. It needs to be linked with an argument root with the functionality or with the technique or with the rationality of your process. So it's not just about, in our case, it's not just about gestures and a collection somehow of designs. Is based on the need somehow of that decision. And this is what we try to explain always when we show these images. The console hall is characterized by the play of the natural light. I mean, working with gold leaves, that was a natural decision. The skylights provoke, then the space appears always in very different manners, depending of the season and depending of the timing that you enter into the room. So it was somehow a natural decision to play with natural light and working with gold leaf. Outside the building tries to express somehow its strength through the material, using again material that was somehow linked with the past of the site. I mean, we used just aluminum and glass outside, basically because of the possibilities that we discovered in the area, in the region, of using these materials, the aluminum, because there was a huge tradition working in stitching with metal, basically. And that's why the building is composed and expressed by these aluminum plates that are characterized in the building, and then help us to transmit somehow what's going on inside the building with this mechanism of light. Light that expresses somehow always with more or less intensity that it's a public building, something is going on inside, and that's why the light provokes somehow, then the visitor can feel attracted and can have the desire for going inside. At the end, I mean, the building appears like this, in this way, sorry. And I always like to finish the presentation of this building showing this picture because, as I said at the beginning, we were two foreign architects working in Poland without having huge knowledge about this site. And when you see the outcome of the proposal, I mean, you can wonder if this is a Polish building or if this is an Szczecin's building. It's probably not a Polish building. It's a product that is defined and composed and designed specifically for this site, for this corner, for this plot. And that's why I think the work can have meaning. When you understand that being an architect when you work abroad means to understand that you are not working in another country or you are not working in another city. You are working in a very specific place. And to find the right answer for that place is the secret for a good architecture when you work from abroad. The second sample I'm going to show you, it's the Museum of Fine Arts in Chur. Chur is a villa, well, it's in a small city in the heart of Switzerland, in the German part of Switzerland. It's one of the oldest cities in Switzerland. And I like to, well, I would like to introduce the presentation of the building, showing you somehow some of the paintings that belongs to the collection of the museum. I mean, this is probably one of the best samples of the collection. I mean, this is a Segantini painting, always reflecting about landscape of the site, or one of the Giacometti's brother, I mean, Giovanni Giacometti, showing again the landscape, this idea of mountains, somehow showing the character of the place. I mean, he appears here again in another Giacometti, or even here in this sculpture that you can see on your left, showing again this idea of, I would say, strength than the landscape contents. I can show you somehow more pictures, of course, but this idea of strength is rooted somehow into the landscape and into the surroundings. And we had to do the extension of this building, this very well-known building. I mean, the name is Villa Planta, but it's very well-known because it was probably one of the first, most recognized interventions done by Peter Zumthor. These two wings are the winter garden that he added to the villa in the late 80s. And the commission somehow, or the brief of the competition described somehow the intention of extending the museum that was placed basically in this building in Villa Planta, extending somewhere here the galleries and the main uses of the Museum of Fine Arts. It's important to note about, I mean, that's why I like to show the drawing. I mean, it's important to look at the drawing. It's a kind of, it's a classic villa, and it's a kind of, if I show you the next one, it's a kind of, it's an interpretation somehow of Palladian villa, somehow. This is Villa Rotonda, and this is the villa that we have to extend. And yeah, if you see, there is a sense of rhythm, there is a strict sense of geometry, this idea of a collection of rooms that are taking you from one to the next one continuously. And there is this idea of using the axis somehow, the transversal and the longitudinal axis, in a very clear way into the building. Somehow, as Palladio was proposing in his masterpiece in Villa Rotonda. And this is the outcome. I mean, what you can see here, I mean, this is what we understood that should be the extension of Villa Planta. Well, later we will talk about why this appears in this way, but I want to show it at the very beginning because the building just tries to express what we understood, as I said before, as the right attitude and the right character for this place. And how to achieve that character, or how to get, how to discover which is the right character or the right attitude, which is somehow basically how to follow a process that takes you to the right side. Basically, what we did at the beginning was try to understand as much as possible the pre-existence, Villa Planta, no? As this was describing, this idea of geometry, this idea of sequence, this idea of rhythm was very important for us. And then, well, there was this idea of composing a building that had the same importance, or that had a good balance between the mass that the building was proposing and the exterior space. And we wanted to do an extension that could have the same balance somehow between the volume that we proposed and the exterior space. And following somehow the same rules than the pre-existence. I mean, we wanted to play with a clear geometry, almost as a Palladian villa. I mean, trying to understand somehow this idea of axiality, trying to keep or trying to impose ourselves the same kind of rules, working with this idea of this perfect squared shapes somehow, because we needed rules, internal rules. And this is somehow how the building appeared. It's almost a cube, 19 by 19. in the 3 dimensions, I mean, that try to get a public space surrounding the building, trying to deal in terms of scale with the persistence, with Villa Planta, but not just focus all the attention in Villa Planta, trying to get a good relationship with the other neighbors somehow, with the other family members of the surroundings, like the office building that I'm pointing out here, or what the buildings at the background. So the building tries to establish a conversation with all the elements that are surrounding it. And the building appears somehow as an element that tries to synthesize. I mean, this is strength that is, from our point of view, rooted into the landscape and into the atmosphere of Chur in Switzerland. Of course, well, we did some assumptions since the beginning in order to get this kind of space or this kind of volumes. We understood that the building should keep only the public uses outside, over the ground, and moving all the galleries and moving all the private spaces below ground. That was somehow, let's call it a price to pay in order to get the right proportion, in order to get the right balance of public space outside. I say the price to pay, but in fact, it was at the end. I mean, something that was unexpected, as I said at the beginning, but that was somehow something that helped us to discover a better atmosphere and a better character for the exhibiting spaces downstairs. The building appears as a monolithic structure. In this case, talking about materiality expressed by concrete, by prefab concrete. Again, using the local knowledge for it. I mean, if not just, it's not concrete just because it expresses perfectly, from our point of view, how the light or how the atmosphere reacts with the materiality. But we use prefab concrete because, I mean, there is a huge knowledge of how to use this material in Switzerland. So again, as in Poland, this decision was related with the nature of the place where we were working. And somehow the building, which appears here on this site plan, tries to synthesize all these ideas into a very simple volume, as I described before, a simple volume that somehow puts the idea of public space, as in sketching, as the main actor or as the main guideline in order to develop the entire concept. This is how the building appears, as I said, and this is the attitude somehow that we wanted to get. Of course, it's something completely different of the building that we were extending somehow. It's completely different than the villa. It has another attitude, it has another character, of course, but it's composed following somehow the essentials of the villa. And that's why I think the building has meaning and has somehow a good approach into the site, because it's a different volume and it's a different expression of architecture. But if we move through the spaces, when you enter, you discover that the building frames the persistence, showing clearly that it was before us here, and that is the origin somehow of this space. Because when you go downstairs and you follow the sequence of the staircase or the main spaces, you discover that the rhythm and the sense of geometry inside the building, well, you discover, I hope people can feel, then the sense and the rhythm of the sequence of rooms inside the building is very similar to the sequence and the rhythm that they are going to discover into the Villa Planta. And because somehow the spaces are composed with the same aim than Villa Planta. And I think that's why the building belongs to this site, because it's developed somehow with the same, let's say with the same guidelines. This is the second basement. I mean, these are the permanent galleries. And if you have in mind, I mean, the plan of Villa Planta, the ground floor, I mean, of course, with another somehow layout, but following the same rules. I mean, the idea of the sequence of rooms, the idea of how to condense the movement through a clear vertical axis. These are the main staircases. How to play with two symmetrical cores that are going to define the structure, that are going to define somehow how the space flows around them. It's exactly the same than the idea that Villa Planta had in his layout. This is a view from one of the permanent collections, the link to the pre-existence to Villa Planta. And this is the plan of the temporary gallery, where the building somehow, or the space, flows even in a more natural way than upstairs. I mean, here we just have two cores without partition walls, trying to get the most flexibility into the space as we could. Always playing with this ideal somehow shape of this square. I mean, 55 by 55 square, 55 by 55 meters. And what was, as I said at the beginning, a rule that we imposed in our process or in our design, because we needed somehow to establish a framework since the beginning in order to play with the same rules than the pre-existence. These are some views of the temporary gallery. I mean, you can see here that I would say that the main merit of these galleries are just how to get the best proportion and the best atmosphere for an exhibiting space when you are underground. I mean, here we are 11 meters below ground, so our challenge, or the challenge of the project, was how to get the best atmosphere for an exhibiting space, being in these conditions. Again, coming back to the exterior, this is the main facade, which is characterized by these kind of elements. Well, this is a technical drawing showing somehow the nature of these prefab elements done in concrete, as I said, and why these elements are done in this way. Well, the elements are developed in this way because, of course, we wanted to get a sense of material that could react with the light, could react with the rain, could react with the different orientations of the building, and of course that could express something that could transmit something. And I like to use this word, to transmit, because a public building is one of the main challenges of a public building, how to transmit things, because we need to attract, or the building needs to attract public visitors. And this idea of use the ornament, because this is an ornament, so it's root to in the nature of the Villa Planta. It's root in this idea of the existence, of the pre-existence, because the pre-existing is full of ornaments, so is characterized by a lot of elements that are somehow highlighting the different origins of all the contents that are going to fulfill the rooms. And somehow we wanted to use the same idea of ornament in order to get this kind of expressivity that we wanted to propose into the museum. So again, it was not just a gesture from our point of view. It was an element that helped us to link somehow, in this case, the new extension of the building with the past of this site, with the pre-existence, and I hope with the future of the site too. Here how the prefab elements appears. Sometimes we use it to work with the jealousy here, sometimes in the blank surfaces, sometimes we use it at the technical elements as this door that appears at the back of the building, and somehow always try to condense this expressivity. The third building I'm going to show you, it's the Fine Arts Museum in Lausanne, in Switzerland too. In this case, the French part of Switzerland, same country. somehow a very different approach because in this case we were in Switzerland, in the middle of, in the heart of the city center. This is Lausanne. You can see the lake here. I mean, again, the landscape, the mountains surrounding the site. And this is the site that the competition proposed in order to build the new Fine Arts Museum and another two buildings. I mean, the Photography Museum and the Museum of Arts, the Decorative Arts. So the competition was proposing to, in this area here, in the city center of Lausanne, they were proposing to do this master plan for 3 museums, which finally we developed just the Fine Arts Museum. Again, just showing you, because well, we like to show the paintings just because, I mean, it's the main, that's the target of this building. And when you do a museum, you need to have in mind that you are going to be the background for the artworks that are going to be exhibited inside. So it's important to highlight it because our work as architects, of course, is to propose a good building, to propose a building that can have meaning with the place where it's root. But it has the main target, in this case, of showing artwork. And that sounds somehow naive, somehow. That sounds very basic, but it's very important to have it always in mind, which is the goal of the building that you have to design, which is the main, yeah, as I said, target somehow. I think it's always very important to note it. Well, into this red line, this was our plot. And into this red line, we had to propose, as I said, this new master plan. New master plan for 3 buildings that since the beginning was, well, we had, since the very beginning, we had a complex approach to the site. We didn't know exactly how to propose it. We were struggling with the site. We were struggling with the objects itself, how to compose this master plan, how to somehow play with existence, how to propose a building with, like in staging or like in Kur, with some meaning by itself, but rooted into the place, trying to get the character and trying to get the atmosphere of the place. And being honest, and we were lost in a lot of time until that we decided to, let me come back to this picture, until that we decided to think about the nature of the building. It was a museum. It was a master plan devoted for 3 museums and 3 public buildings. And again, this word public was the word that helped us to develop or to guide the process. I mean, we decided to look back to the city and start proposing not just a building, but a public space. And that's why I'm showing this reference here. I mean, this is the Uffizi Gallery in, of course, in Florence, in Italy. And it's the best, probably is one of the best samples of how to a public building devoted to artwork composes a public space. I mean, this is the square surrounded by this gallery that most of you already know. And this idea of how to compose a public space surrounded by art, by buildings devoted to artworks, is on the basis of our design somehow. This is the final appearance of the master plan. I mean, this building that I'm showing you here, this is the Fine Arts Museum. This is the Photography Museum, and this is the Decorative Arts Museum. 3 buildings, 3 simple buildings, 3 simple volumetries that can compose an ensemble of buildings that are going to shape the public space that is this public space here. So since the moment that we assumed that the word public was the main guideline for us, the buildings became secondary actors, and we decided just explore how to get the best public space. Understanding that the building should be almost a background for this public space. Just to remind you, we were in the city center of Lausanne. We had the chance to compose a public space surrounded by 3 museums, and we wanted to put in the front line of our way of thinking this idea of public space. So here's the outcome of somehow the first intervention. I mean, the first building. I mean, this is the Fine Arts Museum, close to the train station here, the city center of Lausanne, and how, I mean, the building appears somehow defining a clear facade towards the train tracks, and later you will see a clear facade. Here you can see it, a clear facade facing the public square in front of the building. Since we assumed that this idea of public space was the most important concept in order to develop the project, we assumed that the building should be or should compose a limit in between this atmosphere or this character and the space that we were proposing here. That's why the building appears like an element that protects and characterizes this interior space, this public space. The building appears composed like an element that filters somehow all what happens towards the train tracks. I mean, what happens in this space is basically, you know it as me, I mean, noise, the trains passing every 10 minutes, dust, somehow uncomfortable situations most of the times. So the building tries to protect the square from that kind of experiences and tries to compose, as I said at the beginning, the best public space that we could achieve here. And that's why the building, as this is from the train station, the building appears almost like a limit or almost like a wall, trying to compose this idea of public space facing the city and somehow being very straightforward in how to establish this limit with the train tracks. The building is defined by, coming back to the idea of materiality, by this huge ensemble of bricks somehow. We were using brick as an element that was rooted with the site, with the atmosphere of the place. I mean, it was an industrial place before us. When you approach to the train tracks, I mean, you can perceive this kind of materiality into the gravel, into the mineral surfaces that are characterizing the train tracks always. So the building plays with this idea of minerality too, but introducing the brick as the element that somehow, with the manufacture of the brick and with the idea of how to compose this huge volume of 150 meters of length with bricks, somehow to introduce the hand of the man, transforming the material in something different. And that's why we decided to use the brick as the tool to get the character of this building. This is the public space facing north here. Towards north, the building appears with this rhythm of, or this repetition of elements, these pilasters that are going from the ground floor to the top of the building, repeating somehow and introducing this idea of rhythm, like in the train tracks. Facing the north, this rhythm helps us to filter somehow the natural light that is coming from outside and help us somehow to introduce all the public uses at the ground floor. I mean, the ground floor is a sequence of rooms. I mean, the city, at the center, the main lobby, the bar in the restaurant, a small auditorium, a couple of small galleries for young artists, the offices. We wanted to activate the square as much as we could. I mean, with public life, we wanted to feel of life the public space. So that's why all the public uses are at the ground floor. And that's why this rhythm and this sequence of vertical elements helped us somehow to introduce all these different uses, trying to get calm and somehow sophisticate appearance of the building towards the city. There is a space, of course, which is the main lobby, just this space that appears here, that concentrates one of the main gestures of the project somehow. And I call it gesture because it was not somehow, it's, well, let's say that it's the reason why probably the building appears as it is, or one of the reasons. I mean, the main lobby concentrates its strength in two elements. I mean, not just in the verticality of the space or into this skylight above, but into this rounded shape window. At the brief of the competition, the client was describing the intention of keeping the persistence in this site, the building I showed you at the beginning. As I said, we tried to do it, but we couldn't get it somehow. Because we were concentrating all our efforts in how to deal with the persistence. In this case, in Lausanne, we thought that it was much more important to keep the essence of the place or keep the essence of the persistence, working with the memory of the place. So we decided to keep some of the main elements of this window facing south. That was one of the windows that was characterizing the former building, and trying to introduce it as the starting point of our architecture with the new design. That's why when you enter here, I mean, you discover the new window or the window facing south. And of course, perhaps no one or just very few people can relate somehow this element with the persistence. But we hope that when people enter here and they see the window facing south, they see this element. Somehow the memory of the site activates a kind of conversation between the new visitor, the new building, and the former building that was occupying this plot. So this idea of playing with memory, with playing with the site, was developed in a different way than in Kur, but it's somehow another way to find this specificity that I was explaining at the beginning as one of the most important issues in order to develop your processes as architects. The building just tries to get or tries to compose the best possible background for the artworks. I mean, always playing with light, textures. I mean, inside the building appears like here as a neutral background devoted for the artworks, and then they play with natural and artificial light. And this sequence of rooms that appears almost like in a classic gallery, like a composition of spaces. Yeah, you can see it here in this drawing, meaning how one room takes you to another, smaller, bigger, trying to get a kind of public rhythm into the building too, and characterized, as you can see here at the top of the building, always by natural light. This idea of natural light that is rooted with the nature of how to exhibit in artworks, and that helped us in this case to characterize the main galleries, the upper galleries devoted to the temporary works, that is composed by this complex and subtle somehow filter of skylights that help us to, yeah, as I said, characterize the rooms that are below the element. I like to show the drawings because somehow when you design, or nowadays architects, sometimes we are not conscious about what means design, or people who are not architects are not conscious about what means design. And design means to get this kind of precision and to get this kind of approach to all the elements that are going to compose a building. I mean, try to be, in our case, try to be precise with every single element into the building is what helps us to control and to understand what's the right answer for the site too. So we need to be involved as much as possible in all the detailing of in all the elements of the building. Well, this is the sequence of galleries at the second level of the building. I mean, the temporary galleries, neutral surfaces, neutral materials, trying to get a calm and soft ambience for the rooms and trying to compose a good background. Outside, this idea of minerality between the bricks, concrete, gravel, I mean, trying to mix different textures that are somehow transmitting this idea of an industrial character, but transforming it in something contemporary. The building facing north, I mean, this sequence of pilasters help us to, as I said, hide somehow the different openings and the different ways of the different uses are open to the exterior. And somehow these elements help us to get a good contrast between what's going on during the night, what's going on during the day, and help us to achieve expressive, let's say, expressive moments into the daily life of the building, because the building finally needs, as in staging or as in Kur, needs to transmit, needs to seduce the visitors in order to bring visitors inside of the building, because it's a public building, as I said. And the last building that I'm going to show you is the Tanzhaus in Zurich. I'm showing you 3 buildings in Switzerland as a coincidence. It was not intended since the beginning, just showing you Swiss buildings. But well, this is the last one that we have recently finished in Zurich. It's the extension of the Dance Academy of Zurich. And it has I like to show it because it has a totally different approach than the other buildings, in terms of materiality, of course, and in terms of perhaps in the way of thinking, I think. This is the context where we were. I mean, this is Zurich. I mean, this is the Limmat River. This is a canal that is just in front of our plot, that you can see it here. But well, our plot is just close to this bath area here. This is the canal. And so this is the atmosphere of the site, where you can see somehow this kind of industrial, it's a mix of an industrial and, let's say, it's a place in between two ages. It's between the past that was characterized by the industrial structures, of course, by the train tracks. Here you can see this bridge for the train. And it's characterized somehow by this idea of different layers composing, as in stitching, and an ensemble with a lot of character somehow. In this model, you can see here, this was the building, which is the current, what was the dance academy. Here at the back, we have a housing complex, and this was, and it is, JET, and kindergarten somehow. And the brief described this plot as a plot where we could somehow build the new building, just trying to, well, the brief just described some limits towards the canal, but basically we could, I mean, increase the height here. We could occupy the volume with a lot of freedom here. And here in the model, you can see the outcome of this process somehow, no? Just this kind of platform stepped in 2 levels, and 2 levels that are trying to link as much as possible all the uses and all the public pathways that were surrounding us. There was a pathway surrounding just at the riverside, close to the canal. The street at the back of the site, this street. Between the street and the pathway, there was like 12 meters of difference of height. So well, we had to do something to link both. And somehow the model just expresses the main intentions that we had. We wanted to get something specific, of course, something, as I described at the beginning, that could solve the specificities of the site, the specificities I was describing here. I mean, how to link the streets, how to get a good pathway close to the riverside, how to relate the kindergarten with the dance academy, the housing complex with the kindergarten too. We wanted to propose, because it's a public building, we wanted to understand the building as a public space too. We wanted to somehow compose a field where all these players could have a common sense of life. So that's why we propose here, you will see the pictures later, but we proposed here a garden, a public garden that could activate this public life. And we want to reduce as much as possible the movements as architects that we were doing. I mean, you can see here that the building is composed just by two walls, these two walls, characterized by these triangular shapes. So we were trying to reduce as much as possible the movements, not just as of course, it was an intention, but this idea of reducing as much as possible the process and try to synthesize the process into a few gestures, it's linked with the idea that as much as we can think on this way, we are going to be able to get the essence of the place in a best way. Our idea was trying to get really the essence of this place and try to condense all its qualities and all its strengths into, in this case, just in two walls, just in two elements. We wanted to express with this simplicity all what we perceived and all what we understood in this place. And that's why the building appears like this sequence of elements, this repetition of triangles, these elements that are rooted with what we discovered on site. I mean, this industrial space, atmosphere, let's say, this industrial atmosphere characterized always by this idea of repetition, sequence, very similar to what I described in Lausanne, but in this case, developed with these triangular elements, composing two walls that are going to define somehow the public face of the building towards the city. Why triangles? Why these elements? I mean, you can see here, this is the footprint of one of these triangular shapes. Why these elements are characterized in the site in this way, or the building in this way? Well, of course, it's something, as I said when I was explaining the staging, is rooted with our way of understanding architecture. I mean, something, of course, that we like, and that this kind of working with geometry. But there is always an argument, and there is always a need for it. I mean, we needed to find a balance of a 50% of blind surfaces and a 50% of open surfaces into the facade, because the facade is facing south. So we needed to have this balance in order to keep a good balance in terms of solar radiation. So that's why we work on this way. And then because we didn't want to propose just an element that wanted to propose something that had to be rooted with the nature of the building. I mean, it's a dance academy. So the way of how touching the ground, the way how the wall touches the ground, it was as a metaphor linked with the idea of how a dancer somehow touches the ground too, or how somebody who tries to learn and tries to teach dance relates itself with the ground, and how to relate this idea of gravity in the same way than an architect. So that's why we try to discover a way of developing these two walls, two simple walls, somehow playing with this idea of, again, a different approach to the idea of mass, gravity, and how to touch the ground with the concrete. Because in this building, we are talking not about prefab concrete, we are talking about poured concrete, an idea that we took to the extreme because, I mean, we worked just with one layer of concrete without another layer of isolation. It's just thermal concrete. So this is like 70 centimeters of concrete that help us to play with the idea of depth, with the idea of gravity, as I said before, and an element that is characterized with the fact of how to introduce nature, to how to regulate somehow what I was describing at the beginning as the balance of solar radiation, how to regulate the balance of solar radiation, introducing nature into the building. And that's why we were trying to discover different species that would help us to control the heat during the spring and the summer, and that could help us during the winter and autumn to get a better balance of solar radiation into the building. And it was an idea rooted with the fact that we wanted to somehow blur the limits of the greenery that was surrounding us and the building itself. We wanted to propose a building that somehow could appear as a filter in between the city that was at our back and the river and the riverside that was in front of us. Just everything condensed in this simple movement. I mean, a movement of this stepped structure characterized by two walls and a structure that help us to host finally four rooms. I mean, one main room for devoted to dance and three rehearsal rooms, smaller rehearsal rooms for dancers. From the top of the building, from the garden, the landscape of Zurich appears in this way. The building proposes a landmark. The building aspires to be part of this landmark somehow, aspires to be part of the landscape. And that's why we like to describe the building as a piece of landscape and not as a piece of architecture. And everything developed and composed. I mean, it's a pretty small building, so it was very simple into his composition of spaces inside, but trying always to get the advantages and the profit of the exterior that was surrounding us. I mean, this is the Belvedere that links the kindergarten with the dance academy. I mean, place to relax and to get profit of the surroundings, as I said. The interior is characterized by how the light coming from south enters into the building. These are the office spaces. Just a single material. I mean, the concrete characterizing all the uses and all the spaces. If we go to the ground floor, I mean, this is the pathway close to the riverside. And here appears, I mean, the lobby, the main lobby, open darkly completely to the riverside, and the four main rooms I was describing, three rehearsal rooms and the main room for devoted to dance. The riverside, the interior of the lobby, where appears somehow the nature and the main goal that we had here, how to transform a very simple space in something completely different through these triangular shapes and the nature and the filter of plants and greenery that is characterized the building outside, and that help us to get this kind of play of light, natural light, reflections and movements inside. It's a very simple space characterized by this idea of movement because it was rooted with the nature of the building too. I mean, this idea of movement. The main hall, I mean, again, characterized by the natural light, different scale, but playing always with the same constraints, playing with the same material, concrete. Everything looks simple because this is something that we wanted to achieve, even when it's not so simple. There's nothing squared here, everything is inclined because of the acoustics. Everything is a bit tilt because of the acoustics, but at least the building transmits this idea of simplicity and the idea that just light and movement are the main guidelines inside the spaces. An overview of the main hall, playing with this rhythm of triangular shapes that are basically the main gesture. And why to use this element? And coming back to the beginning of the presentation, why to show the building in this way? Because it's a public building. And even being a small building, even being just a single element into the canal, facing the canal in Zurich, I mean, it's a building that needs to express its importance, needs to express that something public is going on inside the building, and needs to express that the building has this attitude because it's an important building. It's something that we always like to transmit somehow, the idea that a public building needs to activate public life and needs to show its importance. Finally, how the building appears during the evening and how the composition of these elements is somehow a synthesis of what we perceived was important in this site and the site itself. So thank you very much.